We all hear about these billions of dollars changing hands constantly every day. But have you ever really stopped to think about the incredibly sophisticated plumbing system that makes those huge transfers between banks actually happen? It's this whole world of high stakes, almost silent movement.
Exactly. And that's really what we're diving into today. Real-time gross settlement systems, or uh, RTGS for short. Think of it as the engine room of global finance, maybe.
The RTGS. Yeah, it sounds super technical, but I guess, like you said, it's basically the infrastructure, the really efficient setup for the truly big, time-sensitive payments that banks and financial institutions need to make to each other.
Mm.
And our sources today, they really focus on getting under the hood of these systems, understanding why they're just so vital, especially, when we talk about keeping the financial system clean.
That's right. So our mission for this deep dive is essentially to demystify what RTGS actually is, look at the mechanics, how it operates, and really understand its sort of dual role. It's an indispensable tool for sure, but also potentially a vulnerability or maybe a choke point in fighting financial crime.
Okay, so let's start right there, the basics. What exactly are these RTGS systems?
Okay, so at their core, RTGS systems are um, specialized payment networks. They're built specifically for high-value and time-critical transactions,
Right.
primarily between financial institutions.
Right.
The really crucial thing to grasp is how they settle payments. Unlike, say, older methods where maybe payments get bundled together and netted out later, RTGS
Gotcha.
processes each single transaction individually, and it does it basically immediately, in real time.
So when you say gross settlement, that just means handling each payment completely on its own, one by one, no netting.
Precisely. Each transfer is settled entirely independently. And it's this individual processing that ensures not just efficiency, but critically, the secure movement of these large sums. It's about achieving finality at every single step.
Got it. Okay, so these are really for the major players, moving significant amounts of money very quickly. Can you maybe walk us through how that instant settlement actually happens? What's the process look like?
Sure. So RTGS systems, they work by facilitating the direct and immediate transfer of funds between the special accounts that banks hold at the central bank.
Okay, so it's happening via the central bank itself.
Exactly. When a bank wants to send a payment, it sends an instruction. Once that's verified, the RTGS system instantly debits the sending bank's account at the central bank and at the same time credits the receiving bank's account, again at the central bank.
And this isn't something that happens like at the end of the day in a big batch. It's literally transaction by transaction as they come in.
That's exactly right, transaction by transaction. And crucially, because this settlement uses central bank money essentially, funds held at the central bank, it carries the absolute highest level of certainty. It's final, and it cannot be reversed once it's completed.
Wow. Final and irreversible. That sounds incredibly secure.
Yeah.
Are these systems just running constantly then, 2047, given how global finance is?
That's an interesting point. Actually, while there's definitely a trend towards more availability, maybe even 247 in some cases,
Uh-huh.
most RTGS systems currently still operate during specific defined business hours. And there's another key requirement for this continuous real-time flow to actually work. The banks participating, they need to have enough readily available funds, what we call liquidity in their central bank accounts at all times.
Right, because you can't settle instantly if the money isn't actually there.
Exactly. You need the funds on hand, ready to go.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so when we think about the key characteristics, the defining features of these RTGS systems, what really stands out?
Well, several things are paramount. First, as we've been saying, is speed. Settlement is in real time, typically, within seconds or maybe minutes.
Seconds. Yeah.
Yeah. And second is finality. We just touched on this. Once a payment is settled, it's absolutely irreversible. That provides critical certainty within the financial system.
Certainty. Definitely non-negotiable when you're dealing with sums that large, I imagine. What else defines RTGS?
Well, they're primarily focused on high-value payments.
Hmm.
So think interbank transfers, large corporate deals, and the financial operations of the central banks themselves.
So not for your everyday small payments.
Generally not, no. And for stability and trust, they operate under centralized control, usually managed by the nation's central bank or a designated national payment authority. The central institution is essentially the ultimate keeper of the ledger.
Right. The central bank as the ultimate authority makes sense. You mentioned a few examples earlier, Fedwire, Target 2. Could you just quickly remind us where those operate?
Sure. So Fedwire Fund Service, that's the main RTGS system in the United States. Target 2 operates across the European Union. ChopDS is the one used in the UK, and BOJNet is Japan's equivalent. These are
Hmm.
really the major arteries for high-value payments in those big economic zones.
Okay, great. So we've got a pretty good handle now on what RTGS is, the mechanics behind it. Now let's dig into something crucial that our sources really highlighted, its
Yeah.
role in tackling financial crime. How does a system built for speed and efficiency actually become a tool for spotting illegal stuff?
Yeah, it's quite insightful how the core features of RTGS, its transparency, and the very detailed transaction record it creates, actually become powerful allies in detecting financial crime.
How so?
Well, because each payment is processed individually and in real time, it generates this incredibly clear, traceable audit trail. This just makes it significantly easier for monitoring systems and analysts to spot unusual patterns.
What sort of unusual patterns are we talking about? Can you give an example? What might, raise a red flag?
Okay, think about maybe a smaller bank, one that usually doesn't handle huge international transfers. If it suddenly sends an exceptionally large sum to an account in a, let's say, high-risk jurisdiction,
Mm.
known for weaker controls, that stands out.
Right.
Or maybe you see a rapid-fire series of very large transactions coming from an account that has basically no history of that kind of activity.
Mm.
These kinds of anomalies just pop out more clearly in the real-time individual flow of RTGS. And of course, the detailed data helps identify if counterparties are on, say, sanctions lists.
Ah, okay. So the speed, which is its big advantage, can actually work against criminals trying to move money quickly without being noticed.
Precisely. And because each transaction is distinct, settled on its own, it makes it harder for criminals to use techniques like layering,
Yeah.
breaking up large sums and moving them through complex chains to obscure the origin. It's harder to hide within the noise when each large transaction is individually scrutinized. And that very short window before the transfer becomes final and irreversible really highlights why it's absolutely essential to integrate RTGS systems with real-time sanction screening and anti-money laundering AML monitoring tools.
That makes total sense. You see something suspicious happening as it happens, you have a much better chance, albeit a small window, to flag it or even stop it before the money just vanishes into the global system.
Exactly. The intervention window is narrow.
And I guess the rules for who even gets to play in this high-stakes system are pretty strict.
Oh, absolutely. Given how critical these systems are, I mean, a failure could ripple through the entire financial system, right?
Yeah, systemic risk.
Exactly. So the financial institutions that participate are held to really high regulatory standards, very high.
What kind of responsibilities are we talking about? What do these banks have to do?
Well, key obligations include things like real-time screening of transactions against sanctions lists and also lists of people's politically exposed persons.
Right, PPPs.
They also have to prove they have enough liquidity, like we discussed, and really robust systems for managing credit risk. Maintaining detailed transaction-level audit trails is critical too, and they need procedures for reporting suspicious activity promptly, but without, unnecessarily disrupting legitimate payments.
So, lots of checks and balances.
Yes. And often, the central banks themselves will actually conduct pretty thorough audits of the participating banks just to make sure their risk controls are truly up to scratch.
So it's not just about the tech itself. There's this whole significant layer of human oversight and regulation wrapped around it. Okay, now, finance never stands still, does it? How are these RTGS systems keeping up with, new technologies and demands?
Yeah, this is where things are really evolving quite rapidly. We're definitely seeing a clear trend towards RTGS systems offering or aiming for 24/7, 365 availability in more places. That's driven by the broader demand for instant payments everywhere.
Makes sense.
There's also a huge push towards adopting something called ISO 2022 messaging standards.
ISO 2022, what's that?
It's basically a global standard for financial messaging. The key thing is it allows for much richer, more structured data to be included with each payment instruction.
Ah, so more detail in the message itself.
Exactly. And that richer data significantly enhances the ability to automate and integrate compliance checks, making screening more effective.
That must make spotting red flags easier, having more context with the payment.
Definitely. And beyond that, there's a growing focus on improving cross-border interoperability, making different country RPGS systems talk to each other more smoothly.
Why is that important?
Well, the goal is faster, cheaper, more transparent international settlements, which again is also crucial for tracking and controlling financial crime that inevitably crosses borders.
Right.
And looking maybe a bit further out, some central banks are actively exploring the potential of technologies like blockchain or distributed ledgers. They're looking at whether these could maybe enhance transparency even more or perhaps reduce settlement times further.
Wow, blockchain being seriously looked at by central banks for RTGS? That feels like a pretty significant potential shift down the line.
It is. Still exploratory for many, but definitely on the radar.
Okay. But with all these benefits, the speed, the finality, the advancements, there have to be some challenges, right? Some operational headaches.
Oh, absolutely. You're right. Despite all the advantages, RTGS systems aren't without their inherent challenges. One big one is liquidity management, as I mentioned.
Right. Needing the cash on hand constantly.
Precisely. Because settlements are real-time and gross, banks have to constantly manage their funds to ensure they can meet every single payment obligation instantly. That can put a strain on their liquidity.
I can imagine.
Then there's operational risk. I mean, think about it. Any major system failure, a technical glitch, a cyber attack, that could potentially disrupt a whole nation's payment flows
Yeah.
or even international ones. The consequences could be pretty significant.
Yeah, a major outage in a system this critical sounds like it could cause genuine financial instability.
It certainly could. And finally, there's the flip side of finality, the limited reversibility. Because settled transactions generally can't be undone.
Right.
Recovering funds after an error, or especially in cases of fraud, can be extremely difficult, sometimes impossible.
Oof. Yeah.
Uh,
Once it's gone, it's gone.
Pretty
Yeah.
much. And these challenges together really underscore why having incredibly robust operational resilience planning, top-notch cybersecurity, and really strong governance frameworks are just absolutely non-negotiable for these vital systems.
Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive here, it seems clear that RTGS systems are, truly the backbone of the modern financial world. They enable this rapid, final transfer of huge sums, which is just essential for the global economy to function day to day.
Absolutely. But as we've explored, their very nature, that speed, that finality, also makes them a really critical focal point for financial crime risk management. And it necessitates that strict regulatory oversight we talked about to ensure they remain stable and maintain their integrity.
This has been a genuinely illuminating look into a system that, most of us never really see or think about, but it's just fundamental to how money moves at the highest levels. And it really highlights that constant interplay, doesn't it, between pushing technology forward for efficiency and the ongoing battle to keep the financial system safe from crime.
Indeed. And that brings up maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to ponder. Given this inherent speed and the irrevocable nature of these RTGS transactions, how do you think these ongoing advancements, particularly things like blockchain that we touched on, might fundamentally change that delicate balance between efficiency and security within these absolutely critical financial arteries in the years to come?